personal freedoms and government intrusions. Listen here Sunday nights at 9.
AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Wall Street Journal editorial over the weekend encouraging Mike Bloomberg to jump in the presidential race. The water's warm, they suggest.
Anybody feeling it? Are you feeling it, Dan?
Well, Joe Biden got an important endorsement that
the Women's Rotary Club? What?
that undermines Bloomberg's rationale. It's an anti-endorsement from The Nation magazine. This is Katrina vanden Heuvel's rag, The candidate who insists Medicare for all is too expensive for Americans is also the candidate who, like Clinton, endorsed NAFTA, China's admission to the WTO, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, all of which have savaged U.S. manufacturing and workers. Clinton's record cost her in the industrial heartland, and with it, the election. Biden's long record of poor judgment on everything from the 94 crime bill that fueled mass incarceration to his botched handling of Anita Hill's testimony against Clarence Thomas to his defense of Clinton's brutal welfare cuts to his support for the Iraq War, to his role as cheerleader for Wall Street deregulation renders him an even weaker opponent for a president whose reelection poses a clear and present danger to America's survival as a constitutional republic. Woo! Glad he got all the poison out. So that's what Michael Bloomberg can be treated to. He's going to get run over by traffic going both ways from sort of the Biden establishment wing, as well as obviously from the hard progressive left. I mean, his jihad against big gulps is not going to be enough to cover his support for stop and frisk, for example. His support for Bobby O gun confiscation is not going to be enough to disabuse Ilhan Omar that he's a Jewish billionaire. Welcome to the anti-Semitism in the party that you've chosen most recently, Mike Bloomberg. Remarkable reactions to Bloomberg, including, of course, from the irrepressible Elizabeth Warren.
I think what we ought to do is we ought to be building a grassroots movement to make real change in this country. I don't think that democracy should be about people coming in and buying elections.
And incredibly...
And how much money, speaking of his buying election, how much of his own money is he going to use, you think?
Well, that's actually, there's a good Atlantic piece about that. The big question, Bloomberg's candidacy comes down to a single question. And that's apparently what it always was when he was running for mayor of New York City. How much does each vote cost? What's the cost per vote? So do I have to spend $500 million? Do I have to spend $1 billion? Do I have to spend $2 billion? And that, I guess, will factor into his decision. But it's sort of remarkable. The Elizabeth Warren in her Medicare for All plan and the fantasy behind that. Bolshevik Bernie Sanders on Thursday releasing his new immigration plan. Well, if you want to call it an immigration plan. Moratorium on deportations, break up existing immigration enforcement agencies. In other words, abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Grant full welfare access to illegal immigrants and welcome a minimum of 50,000 climate migrants.
Oh, my gosh.
In year one of a Bernie administration. It's remarkable that given Warren and Sanders and given Biden's stumbles and the assault he's under from the even further left, that you have 85% of Democrat primary voters saying they're happy with their choices pre-Bloomberg. But that's what they're saying. So exactly what space does he occupy? The Ray Dalio, I'm a capitalist, but capitalism isn't working for anybody, for everyone, so I'll support some industrial policy to rig the system for some favored constituencies that I need on the path to the nomination, I suppose. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Joseph Sternberg, columnist and editorial board member at the Wall Street Journal, also the author of the book Theft of a Decade, How Baby Boomers Stole the Millennials' Economic Future. Joe, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So I guess I'm just not as excited about Bloomberg candidacy as the Journal's editorial board. I mean, I know he supported charter schools, and that's supposed to be some indicia of a moderate Democrat. But across the span of other issues, I'm just not seeing it. And to the extent he's a capitalist, he's a promoter of rent-seeking, which I don't really consider capitalism?
Well, I think that the challenge in this campaign is that clearly where we are right now, certainly on the Democratic side, there are not a lot of good options, and I think it is probably good for the Democratic Party for it to be a competition between a couple centrist candidates like Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg, even if neither of them is particularly inspiring, and some of the progressive wing of the party, as opposed to letting the progressives go crazy and then we end up with a general election again that doesn't feel particularly satisfying for voters. I mean, remember, I think that it is good for conservatives in America to have a competitive party on the left because the two of them can keep each other honest in some important ways. And I think it's not going to be good for conservatives to have a situation where it ends up not being a particularly competitive election because the Democrats haven't had the option to nominate a reasonably sane person.
Well, yeah. But what do you think, Elizabeth Warren, trying to socialize healthcare, why is she making that her signature campaign issue?
Well, that actually kind of mystifies me to the point where I wrote a column about this in the Journal last week, because I think that certainly it plays very well with the progressive base who feel like it will be an opportunity to finally do big healthcare action of the sort that they wanted to do for a long time. If you can believe it, I think that a lot of progressives were left unsatisfied by Obamacare. I think a lot of them look at Europe, where I am based here in London, and think that America's system could be better. I mean, what I find confusing about the Warren plan is why any politician would want to be in charge of the nation's health care, because certainly in Britain they have socialized medicine. It's a political nightmare for both parties because basically every prime minister of either party becomes responsible for every bad healthcare outcome in the country. Why a politician would want to sign up for that, why they would want to sign up for the constant demands for more money that the government can't really afford to throw into the healthcare system, when there are other potential options for reform. I just find it really mystifying.
Well, it mystifies our old friend Tiny Dancer, too. Rahm Emanuel writing an open letter to Democrats in Politico. Why for the life of me, I can understand why our presidential candidates are failing to heed the lessons from Democrats in 2018 and 2019. He's referencing victories, including some of those on last Tuesday, most particularly the Kentucky governor's race. He writes, does Rahm, Democrat candidates have prevailed in battleground contests since 2016, didn't embrace pie-in-the-sky ideas or propose a smorgasbord of new entitlements, didn't talk constantly guaranteed basic income or promising to make college free or eliminating private health insurance or giving $250 a month in additional Social Security benefits or enacting the Green New Deal or vowing to seize guns from people's homes. So why are they doing it now? But isn't that a bit Pollyannish? You know why they're doing it now. They're doing it now, I mean, in the case of Bernie, because he's a Marxist ideologue. In the case of the rest of them, because that's where the center of gravity is in the party, and I can't be president if I can't get the nomination.
No, I think that absolutely is a big part of it. And this goes back to the point I made at the beginning about how the party would benefit from having at least one more moderate Democrat in the race. Because, I mean, certainly Americans have a lot of things about our healthcare system that we do like in terms of, the quality of care if you have insurance, the ease with which you can get to a doctor, the fact that you don't have the kind of waiting lists that are common here in the UK. But we also recognize that there are parts of the system that need to be fixed. And I think that a more moderate Democrat could at least seize an opportunity that there is out there to try to offer some kind of realistic solution to some of these problems that voters might like, instead of this Medicare for all business that ends up taking away from voters the part of the current system that we actually like.
Well, but don't you have to be honest, though? If someone is severely sick in the UK, don't they go to the United States to seek medical help?
If they can afford it.
Well, I think that certainly what people don't realize is that there is actually a private health insurance market over here. And in fact, employers, if they can afford to offer private health insurance, it's very desirable because that is actually a way for you to try to cut a lot of the long lines that you otherwise have to deal with to wait for care. It's an opportunity to go see a specialist for a test within a week instead of having to wait for 2 months if you're going through the NHS system. So, I mean, Brits will tell you that they have a real emotional attachment to the idea of the National Health Service over here. They like the fact that it's ostensibly very equal, but in practice it isn't equal. If you can afford private insurance or if you can afford to get care overseas, you will.
Yeah, it seems like Elizabeth Warren and some of her friends on the left there thought that they could get away with just rebranding government-run health care Medicare for all because people like Medicare, and that would move people's attention away from the details, like losing your private health insurance, and that just isn't working out for her.
Right, and this is another important point that I think people need to understand when we talk about the European experience, in terms of American healthcare reform options. The UK system of fully socialized medicine is an outlier. Countries like France and Germany actually deliver much better health outcomes for their citizens than the UK does, using systems that are much more market-oriented. I think that people don't understand this, but Germany, for example, has operates on the basis of privately run hospitals and private doctors, and there is some government support for low-income people who need help buying insurance, but it is not anything resembling the British NHS or Medicare for all, and it actually does a lot better than the UK system does.
Do you think that Republicans learned the lesson from the 18 midterms and getting beat up in the suburbs about health insurance? And I note this with respect to the Republican Study Committee's health care plan that does things like extend HIPAA portability and pre-existing condition protections, among a couple of other things that had led Trump at the rally the night before the election in Kentucky to talk about protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and then also sort of setting up, I think, what will be one of his talking points. We're going to protect people with pre-existing conditions as well as pre-existing doctors and pre-existing health insurance plans. We're going to protect it all, and that's what the other side isn't going to do.
Well, again, I think that this is a real lesson that the Democrats need to learn about this kind of Republican strategy, because I think that right now the center of gravity on the conservative side of this argument is oriented toward trying to understand what are the aspects of the current system that voters like and that seem to work reasonably well. How can you try to build on that? And I think that it would, again, politically be good for the left, for the Democrats in America, if they had a couple of candidates who were also trying to operate on that basis and compete with Republicans in that way, instead of this very government-heavy socialized proposal that is going to take away from people the things that they like.
He is a Wall Street Journal columnist and editorial board member, author of the book Theft of a Decade, How the Baby Boomers Stole the Millennials' Economic Future. And also check out his piece on this health insurance discussion we were having at the Wall Street Journal. Universal healthcare makes politics sick. I'll tweet it out. Joseph Sternberg, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
And he